The piano sat in the corner of the lounge, like an old friend who'd seen better days. Not neglected exactly, but worn. The wood had faded where sunlight hit it every afternoon, and one of the legs wobbled just enough that someone had slipped a folded napkin underneath to keep it steady. It was a small Steinway baby grand, not the kind you'd find in a concert hall, but the kind that had once lived in someone's living room, full of memories and cigarette smoke and late-night sing-alongs. Now, it lived at Rosewood Gardens, a senior living community tucked into a quiet neighborhood with wide sidewalks and maple trees that flared red every October. It was a Thursday, one of those early fall days that still held summer's warmth in the air but carried the first crispness in the shadows. Elias walked in through the glass doors just after 11, carrying a worn leather satchel over one shoulder. He was tall, thin in that way people get when they've spent decades sitting at a keyboard, shoulders slightly rounded, hands always moving, even when they weren't playing. He wore a soft gray sweater, the kind that had been washed so many times the cuffs were starting to thin, and dark slacks that didn't crease much. Nothing fancy, just clean. Just right? He nodded to the front desk assistant, a young woman with kind eyes and a laminated name tag he never quite caught, and made his way down the hall. The scent of cinnamon and floor polish followed him. Somewhere down the wing, a group was laughing over bingo. A walker clinked softly against tile. Normal sounds? Comforting in their own way. He pushed open the double doors to the lounge, not heavy, just steady, and was greeted by the usual scene. A circle of armchairs and wheelchairs. Some residents already seated, some still finding their spots with the help of aides. A few waved. One man in a navy cardigan gave a two-finger salute from his wheelchair and said, "Back for round 12, eh?" Elias smiled and nodded. "If the piano holds up." He set his satchel down beside the bench and ran a hand over the keys. Not playing, just testing. Middle C was a little flat. The E above it had a tendency to stick if you didn't lift your finger just so. He'd learned their quirks over the past 3 months. He didn't mind. In fact, he liked them. They made the instrument feel real. Human. He opened the satchel. Took out a small tuning hammer. He wasn't a tuner. Not really, but he knew enough to nudge things back into place. And spent a quiet 10 minutes adjusting the worst offenders. No one rushed him. They knew this was part of the ritual. Like the way the coffee always arrived at 10:45. Or how the aide in pink scrubs always brought an extra lap blanket for Mrs. Kowalski, who said she got chilled easy, even in August, when he was satisfied, or as satisfied as he could be, with a piano that had probably survived 3 moves, 2 floods, and a decades-long stint in a church basement. He sat. He placed his hands on the keys. Not with drama. Not with flair. Just readiness. Then he began. First, a Chopin nocturne, the one in E-flat major. Gentle, familiar, the kind of piece that feels like walking into a softly lit room at dusk. His fingers moved with quiet confidence. No mistakes. No hesitation. He'd played this piece hundreds, maybe thousands of times. He knew where the phrasing should breathe, where the left hand needed to soften just a fraction so the melody could rise. He didn't need the sheet music. It lived in his muscles. A few people closed their eyes. One woman swayed, almost imperceptibly, her hands folded in her lap. A man in the back hummed along under his breath, the wrong tune, but with real affection. Elias played on. After Chopin came a short Schubert impromptu, a little brighter, a little more playful. And then, because he knew some of the residents had grown up with radio and swing, he slipped in a Gershwin prelude. Not the flashy one. The quiet, blues-tinged one in C-sharp minor. He shaped the chords carefully, letting the harmonies bloom just enough before moving on. He liked this piece. It had structure, logic, beauty you could measure. He wasn't showy. He didn't look up much. He focused on the keys, on the sound, on keeping everything balanced and clean. To him, this was the job. Play well, keep time, finish on schedule. He wasn't trying to move anyone. He wasn't trying to heal or inspire. He was just doing what he was good at, providing a little beauty in the middle of the day, like bringing flowers to a room nice to have. Not essential, but appreciated. Still, he noticed her. She sat in the front row, not because she'd claimed the spot, but because someone had wheeled her there and she hadn't asked to be moved. She was small, wrapped in a light shawl the color of dried lavender, hands resting on the arms of her wheelchair. Her hair was white and pulled back in a loose twist. She didn't nod, didn't tap her foot, didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. Her eyes were closed. At first he thought she'd fallen asleep. Happens sometimes, especially after lunch, or if someone was on a new medication. But then, during the quietest part of the Gershwin, where the left hand holds a low chord and the right hand drifts upward in a single lonely line, he saw her fingers move. Just a little, as if her hands remembered something her mind wasn't saying out loud. He finished the piece with a soft resolution. No big finish, just a gentle release, like letting go of a breath. He lifted his hands, waited a beat. Applause came, polite, warm, the kind you give when something's been done well. A few claps, a couple of very nice dear. So, he nodded, gave a small smile, and then, just as he was about to stand, he heard it. A soft voice, not loud, not angry, just, "Certain you played the notes, but you didn't let them speak." He turned. She was looking at him now. Eyes open, clear, not unkind. Just honest, the way someone might point out that the milk's gone sour. Not to scold, but because it matters. Elias felt his throat tighten, just a little. Not embarrassment exactly. More like surprise. Like someone had reached into a drawer. He kept locked and pulled out something he'd forgotten was there. He didn't know what to say, so he said the safest thing. "Thank you." She didn't smile. Just gave the tiniest nod, almost a bow of the head, and looked back at the piano. He packed up slowly. More slowly than usual. As he zipped his satchel, he watched her. An aide came over, asked if she'd like to go back to her room or stay for coffee. She shook her head. "I'll sit a while," she said. Her voice was thin, but steady. Like old paper, fragile, but still holding its shape. He walked out past the potted ficus, past the bulletin board with announcements about flu shots and book club, and pushed through the glass doors into the sunlight. The air outside was cooler than he expected. He stood for a moment, hands in his pockets, just breathing. You played the notes, but you didn't let them speak. It wasn't criticism. Not really, it was. An observation, like noting the sky is gray or the tea is too weak. Simple. True. He thought about it all the way to his car, an older sedan with a dent on the passenger side and a blanket folded neatly in the back seat. He thought about it as he drove home, windows down, the wind pulling at his hair like it used to when he was younger. Before the world got heavier, he lived in a small house on the edge of town, a place with a porch swing that still creaked in the right way in a yard he kept tidy but not perfect. There were no photos on the piano in his living room. Not anymore. He'd taken them down years ago, not out of sadness, but out of practicality. Less dusting, less distraction. He made tea, chamomile, no sugar, and sat at his own piano. Not the fancy one. Just an upright he'd bought secondhand decades ago. He didn't play. Just ran a finger along the edge of the keys. Why hadn't he let them speak? He'd been teaching piano for nearly 40 years. Played recitals, backed singers, even did a few studio sessions back in the day. Nothing famous, but enough to know the difference between playing and saying something. He knew how to shape a phrase to make it weep, how to hold a chord just long enough to make someone's chest ache. He knew, so why hadn't he done it today? He thought about the diagnosis. Not the cancer itself, but the after. The long stretch of time when his voice had been gone literally. Surgery had taken part of his throat. He'd recovered. He could talk fine now. But something else had gone quiet too. Something deeper. He'd stopped listening, not with his ears, but with his gut. He'd started playing safe, clean, precise. Because feeling things. Real things felt like opening a door he wasn't sure he could close again. Better to be good than to be raw. He finished his tea, washed the cup, dried it. That night he didn't watch the news. He didn't scroll. He sat at the piano and played Clair de Lune, the Debussy piece he hadn't touched since before the surgery. He played it slowly, carefully, technically perfect, and when he finished, the house was silent. No tears. No shiver down the spine. Just notes on a page, executed. He closed the fallboard gently. The next morning, he woke early. Made coffee. Read the paper, real paper, not online. The kind you fold and leave creases in. He dressed the same way he always did. Same sweater. Same slacks. Same worn shoes. But when he walked into Rosewood at 11 a.m., didn't go straight to the piano. He looked for her. She was there. Same chair. Same shawl. This time her eyes were open when he entered. He didn't sit right away. He stood beside the piano and said, "Good morning." She looked up. "Good morning." A pause. Not awkward, just waiting. "I was thinking," he said, "about what you said yesterday." She didn't look surprised. Just waited. "I've been playing a long time," he went on. "Sometimes I forget why I started." She studied him not with judgment, but with the kind of attention you give to a clock that suddenly started ticking again after years of silence. Then she said, "Most people play at music. A few play through it. And very, very few let music play them." He didn't reply. He just stood there, feeling something shift, tiny, like a gear clicking into place after being stuck. "After a moment," she added, "my husband used to say, the notes are the map. The feeling is the journey." He nodded, swallowed. "Would you like me to play something? Just for you? Not for the group. Just for now." She considered it. Then, simply yes. Took a breath deeper this time, and he began Clair de Lune, slow, deliberate. He focused not on the fingering, but on the space between the notes. The silences Debussy wrote into the score like hidden rooms. He let the harmonies linger. He didn't rush the crescendo. He played it like he was remembering something important. When he finished, the room was quiet. The bingo game had ended. The coffee had been cleared. It was just the two of them. She didn't applaud. She didn't say anything for a long time then. Softly, "You played it beautifully." Pause. "But you were still holding the door closed." He looked at his hands. They were perfectly still on the keys. "I don't know how to open it," he admitted, quieter than he'd meant to. She smiled then. Just a little. The kind of smile that comes from knowing something hard and kind all at once. "Then maybe," she said, "you need to stop trying to play for an audience and start playing for a memory." She reached into the pocket of her shawl and pulled out a folded piece of paper, thin, yellowed, edges soft from handling. She held it out. He took it. It was sheet music, handwritten, in the corner, in faded blue ink. Someone had written, "Pour Marie lot, eau de car repose entre les tongues," for Marie, where the heart rests between the beats. He looked up. Her eyes were bright. Not with tears. With something older. Something earned. "His name was Henry," she said. "He played this for me the night he asked me to marry him. Under a full moon, in a tiny courtyard in Lyon, the piano was terrible. He missed half the notes, but," she touched the paper gently, as if it were skin. "He let it speak." Elias sat there, the paper in his hands, the weight of it surprising. Outside, a breeze stirred the maple leaves. One drifted down and landed on the windowsill. He didn't say thank you. Not yet. He just folded the music carefully, placed it in his satchel right on top of his tuning hammer, and said, "I'll be back next Thursday." She nodded. "I'll be listening." And for the first time in a long time, maybe the first time in years, he believed that listening was the most important. Part of all, he didn't sleep much that night, not because he was anxious, not exactly, more like wake. Like when you're lying in bed and the house is quiet and your mind isn't racing. It's just unspooling thread by careful thread. He kept seeing the sheet music in his hands, the soft curve of the handwriting, the smudge near the bass clef where someone's thumb had rested too long, the way the paper felt thin as a moth's wing. He kept hearing her voice. He let it speak. He got up at 2 a.m., made tea, and sat at his piano in the dark. No lamp, just the pale glow from the streetlight outside the window. He opened the folded paper and smoothed it on the music stand. It wasn't a clean copy. There were pencil marks in the margins, arrows pointing to certain measures. Little circles around chords, a note scribbled in French. Plus, DICI Calman Soufflé. Softer here, like a breath. He tried to play it just the first 8 bars. His fingers fumbled. Not because it was hard. It was actually simpler than the standard version, but because it felt different. The phrasing wasn't strict. The rhythm wasn't metronomic. It drifted like smoke, like someone humming in another room. He tried again, and again. By the 5th time, he was frustrated, not angry, just tired of his own precision. He kept correcting himself, tightening, straightening, like ironing a shirt that was meant to be worn rumpled. He stopped, sat back, looked at his hands. They were steady, always had been. Steady hands were a gift and a curse. They let him play cleanly, 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 until clean became a wall. He didn't play anymore that night, just closed the fallboard and went back to bed. But he left the sheet music on the stand, let it breathe in the dark. The next morning, he drove to the library, the old one downtown, with oak shelves and a smell like paper and time. He found a book on French jazz pianists of the 1940s and 50s, not expecting much, just something to hold. He skimmed names, dates, grainy photos of men in suits, leaning over pianos in smoky clubs. Nothing about Henry, nothing about Lyon, but one passage caught his eye. For many musicians who lived through the war, music wasn't performance, it was testimony, a way to say what couldn't be spoken aloud. He copied the line into a small notebook he kept in his coat pocket. Not for teaching, just for himself. That afternoon, he called Rosewood. Not to cancel, just to ask a question. A kind-voiced woman named Margaret answered. She worked in resident services, not nursing, not admin, something in between. The kind of person who knows who takes sugar in their tea and who always saves the crossword for Saturday, he asked, gently. If she could tell him anything about the woman in the lavender shawl, the one who sat up front, there was a pause. Not long. Just enough to tell him this wasn't a casual inquiry. Then softly, "You mean Marianne?" He hadn't known her name. Hearing it now felt like learning a secret. Margaret didn't give him a file. Didn't rattle off facts. She just talked like someone sharing a story over coffee. She came to us 5 years ago, she said. After her husband passed, she lived alone for a while in a little house near the river, but eventually the stairs got too much. She doesn't talk much about the past, but sometimes, when music plays, she does. She told him about the small box of photos Marianne kept in her drawer, black and white prints, edges curled. One of a young man in a beret, leaning against a piano, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a cigarette, grinning like he knew a happy secret. Another of the two of them on a bridge, Notre Dame in the background, her in a summer dress, him with his arm around her, both looking like the world had just handed them a gift they didn't deserve. She never plays herself, Margaret said. But every Tuesday and Thursday, she's in that lounge before anyone else. Like she's waiting for something. He thanked her. Didn't ask for more. Some things shouldn't be rushed. That evening, he went for a walk. Not around the block. A real walk down to the park by the creek, where the path winds under sycamores and benches face the water. He sat on one and watched the light fade. A couple walked by, holding hands, not speaking. A teenager on a bike whizzed past, music leaking from his earbuds, something soft, melodic. He couldn't place it, but it made him think of the space between the beats. He thought about what Margaret had said. She's waiting for something. What if she wasn't waiting for the music? What if she was waiting for the truth in it? Thursday came quicker than he expected. He arrived early, 10 minutes before the usual time. The lounge was empty except for an aide vacuuming the far corner. He nodded, went straight to the piano, and opened his satchel. Took out the sheet music. Placed it on the stand, smoothed it once, then he waited. She came in at 10:55. Wheeled in by a young man who looked like he might be a grandson. Same eyes, same way of holding his shoulders. She wore the lavender shawl again, and a brooch shaped like a tiny silver bird. When she saw Elias already seated, she didn't look surprised. Just gave a small nod, as if she'd expected him. The aide helped her settle, then left. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "Did you try it?" He looked at the music. "I did." And he hesitated. It felt fragile. She nodded. "Good, that surprised him." "Good, yes," she said. "Real things are fragile. Strong things break. Fragile things bend, survive." He didn't know what to say to that. So he did the only thing that felt right. He began to play. Not the whole piece. Just the opening, the part he'd practiced in the dark. This time, he didn't try to fix it. He let the first chord hang longer than written. Let the melody enter softly, like someone stepping into a room they're not sure they belong in. He didn't rush the turn at measure 5. He let it ache a little. Halfway through the second page, his left hand slipped, missed a note entirely. A wrong sound in the middle of something tender. He froze, but she didn't flinch. Didn't sigh. Just closed her eyes, not in disappointment, but in recognition. When he finished, he didn't look at her. He stared at his hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "I missed that chord." She was quiet for a long time. Then Henry missed that same chord. Every time, he looked up. She smiled, just a flicker. Said it was too beautiful to get right. Like trying to hold moonlight in your hands. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He wasn't a trained pianist, she went on. He was a mechanic. Fixed radios, bicycles, old citroons. But at night, he'd sit at that terrible upright in his uncle's flat and play. Not for shows. Not for money. For stillness. For joy. For grief. She adjusted her shawl. Music wasn't something he did. It was something he was. Elias looked at the piano. Not the worn keys, not the slightly sticky E, but the whole instrument. As if seeing it for the first time. Not a tool. A companion. "Why did you give me this?" he asked. She looked at him, really looked. Not with pity. Not with expectation. With curiosity, because I heard you trying, she said. Most people don't even know they've stopped trying. But you still care enough to be frustrated. That's where it starts. A silence settled, comfortable, not heavy. Then quietly, "Do you remember why you first loved the piano?" He didn't have to think. My grandmother. She had an upright in her kitchen. Smelled like cinnamon and wood polish. She'd let me sit on her lap and press the keys while she guided my hands. She never taught me scales. Jess said, "Listen. The piano is talking. Can you hear what it's saying?" Marianne's eyes softened. "And could you?" he thought. "Sometimes, when I wasn't trying so hard," she nodded. "That's the secret, isn't it? We spend our lives learning how to speak and forget how to listen." An aide walked in with a tray of water glasses. The moment shifted, not broken, just shared with the world again. Marianne turned slightly toward the doorway as others began to arrive. Greetings. Walkers, the soft shuffle of slippers on carpet. The circle formed. The usual rhythm returned. Elias stood, ready to pack up the music, but she reached out just her fingertips, light as a feather, and touched the edge of the sheet. "Keep it," she said. "Bring it back next week. And this time, don't practice it." He blinked. "Don't practice?" "No," she said. "Just remember." He didn't understand. Not yet, but he nodded. He played the regular set that day, Chopin, Schubert, a little Gershwin again. Same pieces, but something was different. He didn't rush the endings. He let the silences sit. When he got to the Gershwin, he thought of Henry, a mechanic in Lion, playing for love under a full moon, and he shaped the bluesy chords, not with technique, but with tenderness. Like he was handing someone a cup of tea and hoping it was warm enough. No one said anything unusual. No grand reaction. But the woman who usually dozed during the second piece stayed awake. The man in the navy cardigan didn't hum the wrong tune. He just sat, hands folded, eyes closed, face peaceful, and Marianne. She didn't say a word. But when he finished, she looked at him just for a second and gave the smallest, truest smile, like she'd heard a whisper. That night, he didn't go to the piano. He went to the attic. It was small, just a crawl space above the bedroom, reachable by a pull-down ladder that groaned in protest. He hadn't been up there in years. Not since. Well, he pulled the cord. Climbed up. Dust danced in the beam of his flashlight. Boxers, old tax files, a broken lamp. A suitcase full of winter scarves. And then, tucked behind a shelf, wrapped in a faded quilt, a small wooden crate. He knew what it was before he opened it. His wife's things. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, and lifted the lid. Inside, a pair of reading glasses with one arm taped, a lavender sachet, still faintly scented, a journal with a leather cover cracked at the spine, and on top a CD in a plain sleeve. No title. Just a date in pencil. March 12th. He knew that date. It was the day before her last treatment. The day she'd asked him to play for her. Just the two of them. The house empty. The light golden. He hadn't listened to it since. Now, sitting on the attic floor, dust motes swirling around him, he took the CD downstairs, slipped it into the old player in the living room, and pressed play. The first sound wasn't piano. It was her voice, thin, a little breathy, but warm. Okay. Ready when you are. Then silence. Then the opening notes of Clair de Lune, his own playing. From 10 years ago, younger, looser, less perfect. There were mistakes, a rushed run, a muddy chord, but something else. 2. Presence. You could hear him breathing. You could hear the creak of the bench. You could hear the soft inhale when the melody rose, the quiet sigh when it settled. Halfway through, her voice again, barely a whisper. There. That part. Again. He hadn't remembered that. He played it again, the same passage. Slower this time, letting it bloom. And then, just before the final page, her voice clear and sure. Yes, that's it. That's how it feels. He sat very still as the music faded. The CD clicked off. The room was dark, except for the streetlight glow. He didn't cry. Not then. But he sat there for a long time, hands on his knees, feeling something inside him not break, not heal, just shift, like ice on a lake, thin, but still holding. Finally accepting the warmth of spring, the next morning, he didn't look at the sheet music. He didn't practice. He made coffee, watered the fern on the windowsill, read the paper, folded the blanket on the couch, and when he got to Rosewood, he didn't go to the piano first. He went to Marianne. She was already there. Same chair. Same shawl. The silver bird brooch catching the light. He pulled up a chair beside her. Not too close. Just near enough. Thank you, he said. She looked at him. For what? For reminding me that music isn't about getting it right. She studied him. Did I do that? You did. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I didn't remind you. I just held the door open. You had to walk through it yourself. He smiled. The first real one in a long time. Can I ask you something? Of course. What do you hear when I play? She didn't answer right away. Looked out the window, where a sparrow was hopping along the railing. I hear someone who's been quiet for a long time, she said softly, trying to find his voice again. He swallowed. And when Henry played, he asked, what did you hear then? Now she turned to him. Her eyes were bright, not with sadness, but with memory. I heard home, she said, just that. I heard home, he sat with that later. As the lounge filled and the usual sounds returned, laughter, the clink of cups, the murmur of conversation, he went to the piano. Sat, placed his hands, he didn't look at the music. He closed his eyes, and he began. Not the written notes, not the practiced phrases, just what came. A few bars of Clair de Lune, then a fragment of a lullaby his grandmother used to hum. Then something new, rising, searching, not quite formed. It wasn't polished. It wasn't performance. It was just true. And when he opened his eyes, Marianne was crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically, just a single tear, tracking slowly down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She let it fall, and for the first time in years, maybe ever, Elias understood it wasn't about the piano. It was about the space between the notes. It was about showing. I'm not perfect. Not ready, just there, willing to feel, willing to remember, willing to let the music speak. Through you, the tears stayed on her cheek for a long time, not because she forgot it was there, she knew. She just didn't rush to wipe it away, like some people do when they're caught feeling something too big for the room. She let it be. Let it mean what it meant. Elias didn't play anything else that day. Didn't launch into the next scheduled piece. Just sat, hands resting lightly on the keys. Breathing. The room didn't feel awkwardly silent. It felt held. Like everyone understood, without words, that something important had just passed between them. An aide paused in the doorway, tray in hand, then stepped back quietly. As if closing a door on a private moment, after a few minutes, Marianne reached into her shawl again, not for the music this time, but for a small, cloth-bound notebook. The cover was worn soft, corners rounded by years of use. She opened it, not to write, but to show him. Inside weren't notes or lists. They were sketches. Quick, tender pencil drawings, not of faces, not exactly, but of hands. Hands on piano keys. Hands holding sheet music. Hands resting on a table, fingers slightly curled, as if still remembering a chord. One sketch showed two pairs of hands, one older, veins visible, one younger, almost touching over the middle C. These are his, she said, voice low. Henry drew them. Every Sunday morning, with his coffee, said hands told the truest stories. Elias leaned in. The lines were loose, full of movement, not perfect anatomy, but truth. You could see the strength in the knuckles, the wear on the fingertips, the way one hand looked like it had spent years turning wrenches, yet still knew how to cradle a melody, he used to say. She went on. That the piano doesn't care about your resume? It only asks, "Are you here?" Elias looked at his own hands, steady, practiced, careful. Hands that could play anything, as long as they didn't have to feel too much. Later, as he packed up, she asked, "Would you like to see something?" He did. She nodded to the aide, who wheeled her down a quiet hallway, not toward the rooms, but toward a small sunroom at the back of the building, usually used for physical therapy. Today, it was empty. Light poured in through tall windows. Potted ferns lined the sill. In the corner, covered by a faded floral cloth, stood a small, upright piano, older than the one in the lounge, its wood dark and warm. Like old honey, this was mine, she said. He pulled the cover away slowly. Dust floated in the sunlight. The keys were ivory, yellowed with time, a few chipped at the edges. The pedals were scuffed. The bench had a small tear in the upholstery, neatly stitched with blue thread. It came with me when I moved here, she said. They said, you won't need it. I said I might not play it, but I need to know it's here. He ran a hand over the lid. The wood was cool, smooth in places, rough in others, loved, not polished. May I? She nodded. He sat. Lifted the fallboard. The action was stiff, hadn't been played in years, but the tone, when he pressed middle C, was surprisingly sweet, a little muted, like a voice speaking through cloth, but warm. Honest, he played a simple major scale, just to feel it. Then, without thinking, he began the opening of Clair de Lune Henry's version. The one with the smudged pencil notes? This time, something shifted. Not in the music, in him. because he wasn't playing for an audience now. He wasn't playing to prove anything. He was playing in a quiet room, with an old woman who knew what silence could hold. On a piano that had lived through love and loss and ordinary, Tuesdays he let a note ring too long. He let his pinky miss a black key. He let his breath catch, just once in the quiet space. Before the final resolution, when he finished, she didn't say anything. She just reached out and placed her hand light, papery, cool, on the piano lid, right beside his. No words, just presence. After a while, she said, "Would you like to hear a story?" He nodded. She looked out the window, where a pair of cardinals darted between the trees. "It was 1943, she began. I was 17. Lion was not itself. People walked with their eyes down. Words were dangerous. Even silence could be questioned." She paused, not for effect, just to find the right path back. "My uncle worked at a printing shop. Small place. Made flyers, business cards, wedding invitations. He also printed things that weren't supposed to exist, lists of names, safe houses, times, places." She turned to Elias. Music was a good cover. Sheet music looked innocent. Just paper. Just notes. But if you knew where to look, a dot above a clef, a rest held too long, it could hold a message. Wait. She smiled faintly. Henry wasn't part of it at first. He fixed bikes for the shop next door. But he loved music. And he was careful. Quiet in the right ways. One day, she said, her uncle gave her a new piece of music, a simple waltz. "Learn this," he told her. "Play it at the cafe on Saturday. If the man in the corner nods twice, turn the page early. If he doesn't, keep playing." Her hands tightened slightly on the arms of the wheelchair. I was so afraid. My fingers shook. But I played, and the man nodded. Twice, she looked at Elias. That was the first time I understood. Music could be a bridge, a shelter, a way to say, "I am here." "We are still here," Henry found out. Not from her, from watching. He didn't ask questions. Just started coming to the cafe. Sat in the back, listened. A week later, he handed her a new arrangement, a folk song rewritten. "I added something," he said. "In the second verse, just a few notes. Tell your uncle. Their coordinates." She did. That was how it began. Not with grand speeches. Not with oaths. With a shared silence. With trust passed note by note. He didn't carry papers, she said. He carried sound. And sound. You can't search it. You can't confiscate it. It lives in the air. In the memory. In the hands. Elias thought of his own years. All the recitals, the auditions, the careful critiques. He'd thought of music as something to be mastered, controlled, perfected. But for her, for Henry, it had been life itself. "What happened to him?" he asked softly. She didn't look away. "He survived the war. We married in 47. He opened a little repair shop, radios, phonographs, later televisions. Still played every night. Even when the shop was busy, even when the kids were crying, even when the world was loud. He made space for quiet." She paused. He got sick, slowly, his hands. Stopped listening to his mind. But his ears, his heart, they never forgot. No. She looked at the piano. The last thing he played 2 days before he died was that waltz. The one with the hidden message. He couldn't read the notes anymore. But his fingers, they remembered the way home. Elias sat very still. Outside, a breeze stirred the ferns. A single leaf drifted down and landed on the piano lid. He thought of his own wife. How she'd asked for music when words ran out. How she'd known long before he did that some things can only be said in tones and pauses. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "That's beautiful." He just said, "Thank you for telling me." She nodded. Stories are like seeds. They need to be passed on, or they dry up. They sat in silence for a while, not the heavy kind, but the comfortable kind, like two people resting on the same bench after a long walk. Then she said, you don't have to play perfectly for me. He looked at her. You don't have to be flawless. You don't have to impress. You don't even have to be good. She smiled, small, knowing. You just have to be true. He swallowed. I'm trying, he said. I know, she said. That's why I keep coming back. The next few days passed quietly. He didn't practice Henry's score, not in the usual way. Instead, he did something else. He sat at the piano and listened. Not to recordings. Not to Miran. To memory, he thought of his grandmother's kitchen, the smell of apples baking, the creak of the floorboard near the stove, the way she'd hum under her breath while kneading dough. He tried to find that hum on the keys, not the exact notes, but the feeling of it, warm, steady, loving. He thought of his wife's voice on the phone. Years ago, calling from the hospital, just play something soft. I want to fall asleep knowing you're there. He tried to play what that sounded like, not sadness, not hope, just presence. He made mistakes, lots of them, a chord too harsh, a run too rushed, a silence too short, but he didn't stop. He let the wrong note sit there. Like a crack in a vase, not hidden, just part of the shape. One afternoon, he played the opening of Henry's Clair de Lune and let his left hand stumble on purpose, just like he imagined Henry might have, just like he'd done that day in the lounge, and this time. He didn't cringe. He let it be, like a scar, like a story, like truth. Thursday came. He walked into Rosewood with the sheet music in his pocket, not on top of the satchel, not in a plastic sleeve, just folded, soft, like a letter you carry close. Marianne was there early. She didn't ask how his week was. She just looked at him and said, "Are you ready?" He didn't say yes or no. He sat, opened the music, looked at the penciled note. Plus, do I see I, calm and soufflé, softer here, like a breath. He took one and began. This time, he didn't try to play the piece, he tried to live it. He imagined the courtyard and lying cobblestones, cool underfoot. The smell of jasmine on the wall, a sliver of moon just rising. He imagined a young man in a slightly too big suit, fingers clumsy with nerves, heart pounding not from fear, but from hope. He didn't rush the crescendo. He let it rise like a question, and when he got to the part where Henry always missed the chord, the one Marianne had smiled about, he didn't avoid it. He played it wrong. Not badly, just differently, a little late, a little softer, like someone reaching for a memory and almost catching it when he finished. The room was quiet. Marianne didn't move. Then, slowly, she lifted her hands not to clap, but to rest them on the arms of her chair, palms up, like she was holding something precious. After a long moment, she said, "That was Henry." Elias looked at her, surprised. "No," she said gently. "Not him. But, like him, you didn't imitate. You understood?" She reached into her shawl again. This time, she pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. She handed it to him. Inside was a thin wooden box, smooth, hand-carved with a simple latch. He opened it. Inside lay a single piano key, ivory worn thin at the tip, slightly yellowed, the wood underneath dark with age. "My uncle's," she said. "From the printing shop piano. The one I played that first time?" She looked at him. "It's not for playing. It's for remembering." He held it in his palm. Cool, light, heavy with meaning. "Why give it to me?" he asked. "Because," she said, "you're learning to listen." He didn't put it in his pocket. He held it in his hand as he packed up the smooth curve of the ivory, the groove where 1,000 fingers had pressed. Later, in the parking lot, he stood beside his car, key in hand, the wooden box tucked safely in his sacque. He didn't drive off right away. He just stood there, looking back at the building, not at the entrance, not at the sign, but at the window of the lounge, where sunlight still glowed on the old Steinway. For the first time in Years, maybe ever, he didn't feel like a performer. He didn't feel like a teacher. He didn't feel like a man who'd lost his voice and was trying to get it back. He felt like someone who was finally learning how to speak not with words, not with perfection, but with honesty, with heart, with the quiet courage it takes to let a note waver and still let it sound. That night, he placed the ivory key on his music stand, right beside Henry's score, not as a relic, as a reminder. The next morning, he woke before dawn, made coffee, sat at the piano, and played. Not for an audience, not for practice, not even for memory, just for the joy of it, just because it was there. Just because for the first time in a long time, he remembered music isn't about getting to the end. It's about being fully, tenderly alive in the middle, and somewhere. In a sunlit room down the hall, an old woman smiled in her sleep, as if she'd heard a familiar melody return, not perfect, but true. The days began to settle into a new rhythm, not rigid, not scheduled, just true. Elias still came every Thursday, but now he arrived earlier, not to tune the piano or review his set list. He didn't use one anymore, but to sit with Marianne in the sunroom before anyone else was up and about. They'd have tea, chamomile for her, black for him, and talk. Not always about music. Sometimes about the maple outside her window, how its leaves turned late, how the squirrels argued over the last acorns. Sometimes about nothing at all. Just the quiet comfort of two people who'd learned how to be still together. He brought his own thermos. She brought a small tin of honey from a neighbor's bees for the bitterness. She joked, though neither of them took sugar. One morning she asked, "Do you ever play for yourself, just because it feels like breathing?" He thought about it. Not in years, he admitted. I always played for something. A lesson, a recital, a student's exam. Even when I practiced alone, I was still playing for an invisible judge. She stirred her tea slowly. Henry played for the cat, she said. He looked up seriously. A big orange tom who'd curl up on the piano bench and purr through entire sonatas. Henry swore the cat had perfect pitch, always lifted his head at the wrong chords. They both smiled. He used to say, she went on, that if you can play for a sleeping cat and it doesn't move, you're doing something right. Elias tried it that weekend. He didn't have a cat, hadn't since his wife passed. But Mrs. Garza next door sometimes let her old tabby, Mr. P, visit the porch. So Saturday morning, he opened the sliding door, set up a folding chair in the shade, and played softly, just the front porch. Just for the breeze and the bird feeder and the cat who blinked at him from the railing like he was mildly suspicious of classical music, he played a Chopin prelude, not the flashy one. The gentle one in a major, and halfway through, Mr. P stretched, yawned, and settled his head back onto his paws. No applause, no critique, just a cat, deciding the music wasn't worth interrupting his nap. Elias grinned. That was the day he stopped correcting himself mid-phrase. That was the day he let a run stumble and kept going, not because he gave up, but because he trusted the next note would find him. Thursday came again. The lounge was fuller than usual. A few family members visiting, a new resident settling in. But Elias didn't feel the old pressure, the need to be on, to be flawless, to earn their attention. He just sat, placed Henry's score on the stand, and waited for Marianne's nod. She gave it, he began, not with the opening bars of Claire de Lune this time. He started lower with a single. Soft C in the bass. Let it hang. Then another, and another. Building a chord not from the top down, but from the ground up, like laying stones for a path. No one fidgeted. No one whispered. They just listened. He wove in fragments. The lullaby from his grandmother's kitchen. A phrase from the Gershwin he used to play too fast. A line from the Resistance waltz Marianne had described. Not the hidden message, just the tune itself, plain and sweet. Like a child singing at dusk, his fingers moved differently now, not with precision, but with care, like he was handing someone a fragile thing, a bird's egg. A letter written long ago and wanted to make sure it arrived whole at measure 47. It's a place where most pianists surge. Where he used to tighten his shoulders and push forward, he did something new. He slowed, not to pause, not to stop, but to lean in. He let the harmony deepen. Let the left hand swell just enough to hold the weight of what was coming, like a breath before a confession. And then, instead of rising into brilliance, he softened, so much that some in the room leaned forward, as if straining to catch a whisper. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was just true, and in that quiet swell, something happened. Marianne's hands, resting in her lap, began to tremble, not from weakness, from recognition. A tear slipped free, not the slow one from before, but quick, sudden, as if the music had brushed against a memory she hadn't visited in years. She didn't wipe it. She let it fall onto her shawl. A nurse, standing near the door. Someone Elias had seen many times, but never really seen. Lifted a hand to her mouth. Her eyes glistened. A man in the back, who usually dozed through the second piece, sat up straight. His eyes were open, clear. He didn't look at Elias. He looked at his own hands, weathered, spotted, resting on his knees, as if remembering something they once knew how to do. The music didn't end with a flourish. It ended with a return, a single note. Dee held just long enough to let the silence gather around it. Then, released, Elias lifted his hands. Didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. The silence lasted. 12 seconds. 13. No. One clapped, no one said a word. It wasn't awkward. It was sacred, like the moment after a prayer. Then very softly, Marianne spoke. Her voice was clear, stronger than it had been in weeks. There. Pause. You came home? He looked at her, not with pride, with gratitude, with wonder. He hadn't done anything different. Not technically. Same hands. Same piano. Same notes. But he'd stopped guarding the door, and something long kept quiet had finally walked through. Afterward, people didn't rush to leave. They lingered. A woman in a floral dress came up and touched his arm just once and said, "My husband used to play that." Before the stroke, her voice didn't break. It just settled like dust in sunlight. A young aide barely out of high school stood by the piano, arms crossed, eyes bright. "I've heard you play 12 times," she said. "Today was the first time I heard you." He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Later, as he packed his satchel, Marianne asked, "Will you come back next week?" He looked at her, really looked. "Yes," he said. "Every week, as long as you're here." She studied him. "And after?" He didn't hesitate. "After, I'll keep playing. Just differently." She nodded, satisfied. Then, quietly, "Good, because music isn't a visit. It's a way of living." He walked out into the afternoon light, not triumphant, not relieved, just lighter, like he'd set down a weight he didn't know he was carrying. That evening, he didn't go straight home. He drove to the community center, a low brick building with a worn Basque, BALL cord out back, and a sign that read, "All ages welcome." Inside, past the gym and the craft room, was a small music room, donated instruments, mismatched chairs, a digital keyboard with one key that stuck. He'd never been inside. But today, he pushed the door open. A woman looked up from a stack of sheet music. Mid-50s, glasses on a chain, a smudge of ink on her wrist. "Can I help you?" He hesitated. Then, "I'd like to volunteer." She smiled. "For what?" "Whatever you need," he said. "Teaching, tuning, just being here." She didn't ask for a resume. Didn't ask why. She just said, "We have a group of kids on Tuesdays. Mostef never touched a piano. Some don't speak much. Some are carrying things no child should." She paused. "They don't need perfection. They need someone who knows how to listen." He nodded. "I'm learning." She handed him a clipboard. "Start next week." He signed his name. Not as a performer, not as a former concert pianist, just as himself. That night, he sat at his piano again, not to practice, not to prepare, just to be. He played the opening of Henry's Clair de Lune, not the full piece, just the first page. And this time, he didn't think about the notes. He thought about the space, the pause before the first chord, like standing at the edge of a forest, listening for birds, the breath between phrases, like waiting for someone to finish speaking before you reply. The way the harmony changed, not with force, but with grace, like a door opening slowly, letting in the light. He realized something he hadn't been playing for Marianne. He'd been playing with her silences, her memories, her steady presence. Music wasn't a solo act. It was a conversation, and he'd finally learned how to listen, not just with his ears, but with his whole self. The next morning, he got a call, not from Rosewood, from a local radio station, small, independent, the kind that plays jazz at midnight and takes requests from truckers on the interstate. A producer had heard about the Thursday sessions. Word had spread quietly, like smoke from a chimney on a still day. Someone's daughter, visiting her mother, had recorded 30 seconds on her phone, just the part where he softened at measure 47, and sent it to a friend, who sent it to a friend who knew someone at the station. They wanted to know, would he play live? Just once, in their tiny studio. No audience, no pressure, just share what he'd found. He almost said no. Old habits, old fears. But then he thought of Marianne's hands, trembling not from weakness, but from recognition. He thought of the nurse with her hand over her mouth. He thought of the cat on the porch. Deciding the music was safe enough to sleep through, he said yes, but with one condition: I'd like to bring someone with me. They agreed. Thursday came, this time. When he arrived, Marianne was already in the sunroom, not in her wheelchair, but seated on the piano bench, one hand resting on the lid of the old upright. She looked up as he entered. "You're late?" she said, but her eyes were smiling. "Traffic," he said. Though they both knew there wasn't any, he sat beside her, not too close, just near enough that their sleeves touched. Neither spoke. He placed Henry's score on the stand. She placed her hand light, steady on the wood beside his. He took a breath and began, "Not for thee." Radio, not for the future recording, not even for her. He played for the boy and lion who fixed bicycles and believed in hidden messages. He played for the girl who carried secrets in sheet music and learned to trust a nod. He played for his grandmother's kitchen, his wife's last request, for every person who'd ever sat in that lounge, listening not to notes, but to hope. He played like he was remembering how to speak, not perfectly, but truly. And when he reached the place where the music softens, where the world holds its breath, he didn't rush. He let it be. Let it ache, let it heal. And this time, when the final note faded, Marianne didn't say, "There, you came home." She reached over slowly, carefully, and covered his hand with hers, just for a moment, warm, certain enough. Later, in the car, on the way to the radio station, she sat beside him, not in a wheelchair they'd arranged a ride with a lift, but in the passenger seat, wrapped in her lavender shawl, the silver bird brooch catching the afternoon light.